Vision. This is going to be on Legal AF YouTube channel, and I'm going to give you a primer for it right here as we lead into Thursday. Lots to do, lots to talk about for a viewing guide on Legal AF. Wednesday, we're going to have up the live feed of the oral argument at the United States Supreme Court about whether Donald Trump can capture and take over the Federal Reserve, destroy its independence, and fire one of its board of governors, Lisa Cook, based on a social media posting that he did without due process. We focus now on Jack Smith. And you can focus while you're here on helping us grow this channel in 2026. Hit the free subscribe button below. Consider becoming a paid member and slide over to our Substack where with your help as a paid member, we can get the resources we need to continue to grow and oppose the Trump administration. Jack Smith testified back in early December before the House Judiciary Committee because Jim Jordan was afraid of what the American public would hear, especially with House Democrats leading the examination. And that with public pressure, and that's sort of the focus of this hot take. For those that get fatigued, that get disheartened, that your voice isn't being heard, that your criticism in the public square of ideas, the marketplace of ideas, is not being heard. It is because of the pressure that we have placed, the crowds and the courage about this issue, that forced politically the MAGA who lead the House Judiciary Committee, because they're in the majority, to succumb and bend to the will of the people and let Jack Smith take the stand, if you will. And that's a good thing. And that is something that you should spend some time today patting yourself on the back because of your support of Legal AF, because of your support of people we bring on the show like Jamie Raskin, like Senator Moskowitz. I've got Congressman Swalwell joining us as well to talk about these issues. So let's get down to what we can expect based on the format of the prior video transcript and video deposition that's already been out. Let's start with Jamie Raskin. I want to focus everybody's attention back on Jamie Raskin, one of the leaders, bipartisan committee, Jan 6 special committee about the Jan 6 investigation, a constitutional scholar and lawyer. I've had the pleasure of introducing Jamie Raskin at a fundraiser down in Miami for the Democratic Party. Met him personally and have a friendship with him. Jamie's going to be leading the charge here. Here's what Jamie Raskin has had to say about Jack Smith's testimony. Let's play the clip.
Mr. Chairman, there are some lingering questions. Most of them could be answered by Donald Trump, who's never
don't know who to talk to and who
testified under oath about what he did on January 6th, other than sit on his hands and probably order hamburgers and French fries while he watched the whole scene on TV unfold. Did nothing to send out the National Guard under his unilateral direct control in the District of Columbia. And if you don't believe me, look it up, Ms. Hagman. Look it up. The president controls the National Guard in the District of Columbia. I'll bet you a lunch with your former occupant of your office, your predecessor, Ms. Cheney, who's somebody who brought great honor to this institution. And I'll tell you this.
And
I'll tell you this. The truth is a resilient thing. We're not going to put up with a pack of lies in this subcommittee and a bunch of conspiracy theories. We're not. So have at it. Throw what you want against the wall, but you better learn the first lesson they teach lawyers when you pass the bar. When you go to court, you better bring the evidence with you.
Now, in addition to Representative Raskin, we're going to hear from Representative Swalwell, who will also be leading the charge for the Democrats. In addition, we'll hear from Jasmine Crockett. We'll hear from Ted Lieu. And there's a whole series of other representatives who will get 5 minutes apiece. Now, that stands in contrast to what we saw when Jack Smith testified back in early December behind the closed door. Each party took turns with 1 hour blocks back and forth. This will be a different format. Not sure it impacts us. We know what Jack Smith's going to say. And just to remind you, let me play you some top clips from his testimony, his video testimony, and you know he's going to be consistent. Here are some clips from Jack Smith when he gave the closed door that we forced out in public the video transcript of. Let's play it.
So did you develop evidence that President Trump was responsible for the violence at the Capitol on January 6th?
So our view of the evidence was that he caused it and that he exploited it and that it was foreseeable to him and was aware in the days leading up to January 6th that his supporters were angry when he invited them and then he directed them to the Capitol. The evidence here made clear that President Trump was, by a large measure, the most culpable and most responsible person in this conspiracy. These crimes were committed for his benefit. The attack that happened at the Capitol, as part of this case, does not happen without him. The other co-conspirators were doing this for his benefit. So in terms of why we would pursue a case against him, I entirely disagree with any characterization that our work was in any way meant to hamper him in the presidential election. I would never take orders from a political leader to hamper another person in an election.
The decision to bring charges against President Trump was mine, but the basis for those charges rests entirely with President Trump and his actions.
The House Judiciary Committee released video of its closed-door 8-hour hearing with Jack Smith. Smith led 2 investigations and failed prosecutions of President Trump for his handling of classified documents and his role in attempting to overturn the 2020 election.
So did you develop evidence that President Trump was responsible for the violence at the Capitol on January 6th?
So our view of the evidence was that he caused it and that he exploited it.
Trump has continued to say that he did not do anything wrong on January 6th. Smith vocally defended his investigations against accusations from Republican lawmakers that the previous administration weaponized the justice system against Trump.
The evidence here made clear that President Trump was, by a large measure, the most culpable and most responsible person in this conspiracy. These crimes were committed for his benefit. The attack that happened at the Capitol, as part of this case, does not happen without him. I entirely disagree with any characterization that our work was in any way meant to hamper him in the presidential election. That's not who I am. And I think people who know me and my experience over 30 years would find that laughable.
Now, what I expect is more of the same, that Jack Smith is going to say that the prosecutors had developed, by the time they brought and sought the indictments, they had developed sufficient evidence not just to satisfy the base level that they had probable cause to believe that a crime had been committed, but they had so much evidence that he believed that he'd be able to sustain his burden beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest level of prosecutorial burden in criminal cases, that he's saying to the American people, 12-0, that's how many jurors there would have been. I would have been able to sustain and obtain a conviction against Donald Trump on these counts. And this is notwithstanding him understanding that the United States Supreme Court had ruled in the middle of his prosecutions that Donald Trump had immunity from certain of his criminal conduct committed pursuant to his official constitutional duties as president. Even with that, in consultation with constitutional scholars, Jack Smith was that confident, both in the DC election interference case before Judge Chutkan and in the case before Judge Cannon in Florida about the Mar-a-Lago obstruction of justice and espionage case. We know also, because we've seen Jack Smith before, right? When he announced the indictments, he gave very short press conferences. We've seen those. When he was able to issue, under Merrick Garland, the then Attorney General, Volume 1 of his final report about DC election interference. He was never able to get out and have it released to the public, volume 2 about Mar-a-Lago. Now we know, because that's been blocked by Judge Cannon, we may or may never see it, even though he completed it, and it would be the only special counsel report that's not given to the American people. I am sure that's going to be a topic within the Thursday live public hearing with Jack Smith. Now, we know from past reporting that when he gave his deposition, the Department of Justice warned him, and he'll be sitting with his lawyer. We wouldn't expect Jack Smith not to have his own lawyer. That would be criminal. That would be professional malpractice on his part. We know from his lawyer and others that right before he gave his last testimony, the Department of Justice warned him that he was not allowed to talk about Volume 2 and Mar-a-Lago because they want to hide from the American people the evidence concerning Donald Trump obstructing justice by retaining documents that he should not have retained that belonged to the American people, including top secret and classified documents, which only got kind of returned because the FBI had to do a search warrant execution and raid on Mar-a-Lago. I mean, when I say a raid, they coordinated with the lawyers for Donald Trump. It wasn't like they showed up at 6 o'clock in the morning with Donald Trump and Melania in a bathrobe and a cup of coffee. He wasn't even in Florida in August of that year when they executed the search warrant. They made sure he was up at Bedminster at his other golf course. But in any event, that's how we got the documents back. It's also perverse. And there's calls now for Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's last criminal defense lawyer after he fired a bunch of them, who helped him win in Mar-a-Lago and helped him win ultimately about the National Archive fight that Donald Trump was having about his documents. Who's in charge of the National Archive and record keeping for the Trump administration right now as an acting administrator for the National Archive? The same criminal defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, that helped Donald Trump obstruct justice, at least, well, let me put it this way. It's the same criminal defense lawyer that defended Donald Trump on obstruction of justice charges about his interaction with the National Archive and hiding the documents from the FBI and the National Archive. The guy's now in charge. The wolf is in charge, or the fox is in charge of the chicken coop. And we'll continue to follow all of that. So tune in here on Wednesday at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Time, where I'll be doing a live pregame show of the United States Supreme Court oral argument about Donald Trump's attempts to fire a one of the 7 board of governors for the Federal Reserve, therefore taking over the entire Federal Reserve in the majority and its interest rate setting mechanism. Important. Thursday, I'll do a pregame show before Jack Smith's live to the public testimony, where he'll be led through his examination by Representative Jamie Raskin, the leading Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, and the other Democrats, lawyers among them, who will be leading the charge for this public hearing, which is a product of the pressure independent media has placed on this issue and your support of it. So don't ever think that you don't have the power to influence what happens in the chambers of Congress, even in the Oval Office. You do. And we'll continue to follow it all right here. Take a minute, hit the free subscribe button, slide over to Legal AF Substack and do the exact same thing. Until my next report, I'm Michael Popak. I'm Michael Popak, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touches Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popak Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popak Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states. States and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.
All right, I'm going to jump right into things tonight because so much is going on. And I want to start in a place sort of sideways of where people have asked me to start. And that is a question about the Epstein files. And what people are asking about, first of all, and a lot of, is the testimony from Sasha Riley. And why are people not talking more about that? And the answer to that is that sort of a big life lesson here. The radical right is salting a lot of crap around the Epstein files. It's doing that really quite deliberately because then if some of the material turns out to be fake, they will be able to discredit all of it. So people are taking any new material like that really, really carefully. And I would urge you to remember that if it is proven true, whenever that gets chased down, or if it is not, the horrors that the Epstein situation has visited on its victims, the survivors, and also on the country, are not going to be less bad because they're coming out a little bit later. So that's, I've gotten emails all day with people talking about that and asking me to write about it, and I will not do so until it has been thoroughly vetted and looks really clean. And there's a lot of material in the in and around the Epstein files that has not turned out to be accurate. So I wanted to start there with that question because so many of you asked it, but I don't want to stop with the Epstein files because everything else I'm going to talk about is always in front of the backdrop of the fact that the administration is breaking the law even as we speak. That is, on November 19th, the U.S. Congress overwhelmingly passed a law requiring, not saying we think it would be ducky if you felt like, requiring the Department of Justice to release all the Epstein files, not the ones they felt like, by no later than December 19th. And I know math is not my strong suit, but December 19th went flying by many weeks ago. Within that law, it's called the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and you can Google it. Unlike many of the laws that Congress passes, it's actually quite short and very understandable. It's only about a page long, small type, yeah, but it's very clear. In addition to requiring that those files be released, there were very specific guidelines for what could be redacted, and it was to protect the victims and nothing else. And we know that the Department of Justice has said, but there's another law that says we have to make sure that nobody's reputations get hurt, and that's why we have blacked out so much of it. What they have released at this point is estimated to be less than 1% of the totality of those files. And they are now saying, there's just so much we can't get to it. In addition to the release that was required, the Department of Justice was also supposed to explain and justify every redaction. Well, of course, that went by the wayside as well, in part because they haven't released anything, or they've released less than 1%. So keep that in mind, because clearly there is something in those files that they know is going to be unbelievably damning. And the way you know that is not just the obvious, that they're not releasing them, despite the fact that Attorney General Pam Bondi said last July she had gone through them all. But also because think of what the administration has done to the 5, I believe it was, members of Congress, maybe 6, who released that video reminding U.S. military personnel that they had a duty not to obey illegal orders. They've gone ballistic over that. We now know that Jason Crow of Colorado is being investigated. We know that Alyssa Slotkin is being investigated. And they've tried to go after Mark Kelly of Arizona, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, say to reduce his retirement rank, sort of going after him administratively because of that video. In that video, they simply reiterated the law. These are lawmakers reiterating the law. And they also have the protection of what's known as the speech and debate clause, which is outlined in the Constitution. And it is designed to make sure that Congress critters can criticize the government openly and can say things about the government without any kind of legal or professional repercussions or personal repercussions. Now, it's the speech and debate clause that the radical right has been using to seed crap all through the news all the time, because you can't go after something a congressperson says. So, they say crap in investigations, and then it makes the news, and nobody can say, hey, you shouldn't have done that, because they're covered by the speech and debate clause. So these same Congress people who said you can't, you have a duty not to obey an illegal order, are now, that's what the administration is going after them for saying, despite both the First Amendment and the speech and debate clause. But why am I bringing it up in the context of the Epstein files? Why did the administration go so bonkers over that? Well, now we know that, in fact, on September 2nd, that first set of strikes had at least 2 things that legal analysts have called war crimes. And the entire operation itself looks as if it is also illegal and part of breaks all kinds of international rules. And those war crimes are, first of all, that they used a plane that appears to have been decorated, made to look like a civilian plane, which is against the rules of war, and also that double tap that killed the people who were in the flotsam is also a war crime. So why did they go so ballistic and try to shut those people up? Because it looks like they had already broken the law. And that's what I think you're seeing with these Epstein files. They know they're in deep trouble, so they're trying to muddy the waters. And they're muddying the waters not just by refusing to hand over these files and saying, oh, there's just so much, but also by trying to pull the Clintons into this. And so far, lots of people are saying, oh, yeah, the Clintons should testify. Let me break that down for you a little bit. There were, I believe it was 8 subpoenas related to the Epstein files that the House Oversight Committee put forward. And then they dismissed 6 of them. They have only interviewed 2 people in the last year. And now they are trying to hold the Clintons in contempt, even though Bill Clinton has been out front saying, please release everything that has my name or my photograph in it, because you're just trying to make this about me when it's really about Donald Trump. And of course, Hillary Clinton wants no part of this, because this has been a real way that the Republicans have repeatedly turned out their voters, is by accusing her of things. They'll lock her up, the email things, the Benghazi, all of that stuff. And I just think she's done. She's not going to play that game any longer. But this is not about the Clintons. If it is, if they're in it, more power to whomever takes them to court and arrests and all that. But this is, again, an attempt to make those Epstein files go away. And the more they do that, the more it says to me what we've already seen is horrific. So it says to me that there is something really bad in the Epstein files. And please don't lose track of that. All right. So now the other thing I want you to keep your mind around as we move forward through the material today is Trump is not okay. I got a number of emails today with people saying to me, what's he going to do next? You've said things are going to get bad. What's it going to be? Have you ever had a relative who's got dementia? And again, I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose this man, but I can listen to him, and I know he is completely erratic, does not seem to know what's going on. I can't tell you what he's going to do. But it's worth remembering in all of this that this is a person who is acting entirely by impulse, whatever looks good at the moment. And then his handlers and the Republicans in Congress are trying to make sense of it on the other side. And so you're seeing stuff that just doesn't make any sense at all. You're also seeing people putting pressure on him in different ways because they just don't know what he's going to do. And they're trying to stop him from doing things like attacking Iran or attacking Greenland. And so that's another thing is I'm trying to make some sense out of this for you. Recognize that we have never in our history had a president who was mentally, many forks shy of a picnic. And that's what we got going on here. So those two things are really important in the background. But there's also another thing. I'm sorry, boy, when I went into American history, I did not think I was ever going to be literally the material that I'm going to talk about tonight would be an entire administration in any other presidency. And we're doing it all in this one day. And it's every day like this. There's a reason you're exhausted. And partly that's by design to make us exhausted. Anyway, the other thing to remember here is that Trump is badly underwater in every poll. And he's badly underwater even in what are his signature issues. So the economy, for example, lots of people voted for Trump because they wanted the economy to get better after the pandemic. And in fact, he has really thrown a spanner into the works of the economy. Inflation, we know from material that came out in the last day or so, inflation continues higher than it should be. It's about 2.7. Usually the Fed likes it around 2. It's higher than it was under Biden in the last several months of his administration when he was bringing inflation down. It's going back up again. And we also have the problem that real wages have not kept up with it. Under the Biden administration, real wages actually increased faster than inflation. That is no longer happening. And hiring is also down significantly. So the economy is a hurting thing. But also we have the issue of immigration and ICE's enforcement of the immigration rules. Now, there's a bunch of things that are causing problems right now for the administration. One of them is that a new report today out from Wired, which is a really interesting magazine, by the way, as is 404 Media, both organizations that look primarily at technology. Anyway, Wired today came out with a study about the ways in which the U.S. intelligence community has been looking at Tren de Aragua, which is the Venezuelan gang that Trump insists has invaded the United States. And what they found was that looking through hundreds of pages of reports from U.S. intelligence in 2025, that in fact, U.S. intelligence is not even sure that gang is operating in the U.S. While there are members of that or former members of that gang operating in the U.S. and committing low-level crime, they are not at all sure that in fact there is any kind of an organized attempt to make Tren de Aragua a thing in the United States. So that whole justification for this really violent crackdown, remember the Black Hawk helicopter where the people rappelled into an apartment building in Chicago, now looks at, and said we had to because this place is full of Tren de Aragua. Well, maybe not, so they have that hanging out there now. But the real thing hanging over the administration is that the American people did not like the roundups of undocumented immigrants and sometimes legal immigrants and sometimes U.S. citizens anyway. They thought that this was way more than they bargained for when Trump ran for office in 2024. He said he was going to go after the worst of the worst. Remember, the criminals, the rapists, the murderers, and so on. Instead, what we're seeing is what one always sees, as I've said before, when you have roundups like this, officials always go after the low-hanging fruit. They always go after the women and the children, the vulnerable populations, because they're easy. And this is written in neon all over American indigenous history whenever the officials went after a group of indigenous Americans that were hostile, usually young warriors. They didn't go after the young warriors. They went after the elderly and the women and the children because they didn't fight back. Well, you're seeing the same thing now with these sweeps, and Americans didn't like it. And they didn't like it before a week ago Wednesday. But a week ago Wednesday, when the ICE agent Jonathan Ross shot and killed Renee Good in Minneapolis, a 37-year-old white mother, real support, any kind of real support for ICE deployments just plummeted. It just fell off a cliff to the point right now that only about 20 to 30% of Americans think that ICE is doing a good job, and everybody else doesn't. Those are really bad numbers. I have said to you before that even in the worst of a worst case scenario, a right-wing movement will have between 20 and 30% approval. Even at the very end, even when it's going down, you really never go below 20%. And in this case, they're at that with this, with the ICE deployments. So they have that going on. At the same time, in December, on December 23rd, I believe it was, the Supreme Court said that the administration could not federalize National Guard troops to impose its will in Democratic-dominated cities. That they didn't, it wasn't a final decision, it was a temporary decision, but usually that's a pretty good indication of where the court is going. So now all of a sudden you've got a president who can't use the federalized National Guard the way that he and the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, have been arguing. You may remember in October, Stephen Miller talked about Trump having plenary power over the military, including the National Guard. And the Supreme Court just said, not so much. The Supreme Court said that you can't, in fact, the president cannot, in fact, use the National Guard instead of the military to enforce laws. And the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 prevents the government from using the military that way. So it looks as if the administration is trying to ratchet up violence in order to give it an excuse to invoke the Insurrection Act. And this, by the way, is something that Stephen Miller has called for a long time. And their seeming understanding is that the Insurrection Act will let them declare martial law. Those actually aren't the same thing. The Insurrection Act would let the military enforce federal law and any state laws that involve constitutional rights. It's not clear that they would be able to enforce state law. Of course, the Trump administration has been interpreting federal law really, really broadly. So I'm not trying to downplay what this means. I'm suggesting this is really a stretch. But it seems clear that's what they're trying to do. And I'm going to come back to what Governor Tim Walz is doing to try and prevent that. But before I get there, I want to point out something. And that's that when Trump was using the concept of federalizing the National Guard troops and being able to move them state to state, he took on Los Angeles, he took on Portland, Oregon, he took on Chicago. When he took on those big cities, those are big cities, he wasn't very successful. So the next place he really has deployed stuff is on the cities that are the next size down, the next tier down in terms of size. Minneapolis, St. Paul, beautiful cities, by the way, but they're not as big as LA. And the reason I mention this is because there's all kind of rumors out there today and statements out there today that the next thing he's going to do is he's going to go into Lewiston, Maine. Lewiston, Maine has a fairly large Somali population. They've been there a long time. I mean, I don't know anything about citizenship rates here. I know in Minneapolis, the citizenship rates of Somali Americans is about 95%. And I'd be very surprised if it isn't the same here. As I say, this is not a new population of Somalis. But the reason I mention that is, have you been to Lewiston, Maine? I've been to Lewiston, Maine quite a lot, actually, and it's small. It's teeny tiny. So, why do I mention that? Because I think there's a numbers problem here for the Trump administration. That is, right now, we know there are about 2,000 ICE agents. We also know that Trump has been pulling in Border Patrol agents, and it appears there's been at least one sighting of a different kind of police force, and now I don't remember which one it is. Remember that the Department of Homeland Security has a lot of different kinds of law enforcement within it, and so to some degree does the Department of Justice. The Federal Bureau of Investigation sits under the Department of Justice, and it certainly has agents who are supposed to be doing sort of white collar crime, corruption, and so on.